ActionSA is making a little bit of a comeback in the popularity polls recently, and it'll be interesting to see how it performs in the election on the 4th of November. But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk to the man who is driving, certainly in Parliament, the most aggressive support for farmers. Well, I don't know if you could call it most aggressive, because certainly Freedom Front Plus has also been in there as well. But Athol Trollip from ActionSA, the leader of ActionSA in Parliament, has been very vocal in his opposition to the way the foot and mouth disease crisis has been handled by the former DA leader, John Steenhuisen. Athol is a farmer, so he should know. We'll find out more from him in a moment. That's why I know whenever I talk to you, Athol, it's always early in the morning. You've still got those farmer genes very deep in your soul. But you also have been a politician for a while, and you know John Steenhuisen. You were in the same party as John Steenhuisen for a long time. And I suppose there would be those saying, oh, yes, but he would say anyway that Steenhuisen's making a muck of it.
Yeah, good morning, Alec. I am a farmer, born a farmer. And as you say, once you have those genes in you, they don't go away. I'm a sixth-generation farmer. So farming is actually what I have done most of my life. I have been a politician for nearly 40 years. Part of that time, I was both a farmer and a politician. So farming is very much my focus. It's my passion. And I was a livestock farmer. So this foot and mouth disease outbreak is particularly something that I'm concerned about. And more importantly, not only because of me being a livestock farmer, I know that many of the people who live in the rural areas, the poor rural hinterland of this country, rely solely on livestock. Livestock is not only has a commercial value, but it is the cornerstone and backbone of rural livelihoods. So if those livelihoods are destroyed even more than they are now, and I mean, we have the greatest urbanization challenge in the whole world because people are fleeing the poverty of the rural hinterland, and this is compounding that. So, yes, I know John Steenhuisen, and I know the DA better than most because I spent most of my life in that party and its predecessor parties. And one thing I do know about the DA and its predecessor parties is that it is not a statist organization. It is a political party that champions smaller government and champions more involvement of the private sector. And that's why this management of this crisis has been so confounding for me and everybody else, in that we have a DA minister who has doggedly stuck to a statist approach to handling the management of this foot and mouth disease outbreak.
Start your day a step ahead. Biz News Insider. It delivers the business stories that matter every morning straight to your inbox. Sharp, fast, and free. Subscribe now. Now, we can ask him, and he will presumably say he's only doing his job, but from where you're sitting, the backstory, why is Steenhuisen so ANC supportive in this whole approach? Because it has been surprising many people.
You know, Alec, I not only for your interview, but I've been monitoring this very carefully. In the Portfolio Committee on Agriculture, I am, as you said, very outspoken on that committee. The Freedom Front Plus has been outspoken, but they're not well represented or represented at all on that committee. So they speak basically from the far sidelines. I was reading a report from the Director General of Agriculture this morning, Muketsa Ramasodi, and it was addressed to the chairperson of the committee. And she wanted a report on the update on the management of foot and mouth disease in the Western Cape. Now, I sent you some communication from our last Portfolio Committee meeting where the department was lamenting the fact that they don't have enough money to travel, that they have restrictions around access to vehicles and funding for, petrol. And also they have limited staff resources. But let me read directly from this letter from Muketsa Ramasodi to the chairperson from the Western Cape. And it says, the outbreak furthermore places increasing strain on state resources, including veterinary personnel, laboratory and diagnostic services, vaccination logistics, surveillance operations, disaster management coordination structures, and biosecurity enforcement. Now, if you take those 6 issues that I've just read to you that are the main constraining factor in handling this disease for the department, and you give it to the people who are most affected by this disease and say to them, you handle access to veterinary personnel, you handle the services of laboratory and diagnostic systems, you handle the vaccination logistics, you handle surveillance of your own animals, you handle the disaster management prescriptions, and then most importantly, you take care of biosecurity on your farm. Half of the department's problems will go away. But what I can't understand is that initially, the department really battled to get hold of vaccines. It was a slow process. Recently, we were told that there were 9.8 million vaccines in the country, but only 3.8 million vaccines had actually been administered. The minister is now saying that there are 13.5 million vaccines in the country, but that number of 3.8 is only going up incrementally, very slowly. So the problem no longer appears to be access to vaccines. It appears to be vaccination. Now, Alec, one thing farmers do every day of their lives is vaccinate animals. And I received a WhatsApp from a really good friend of mine who's one of the top dairy farmers in the Eastern Cape a few weeks ago when he was so excited to have received finally his allocation of vaccines. And he had two of his staff who stand at the entrance of a rotary milking parlor who administer and monitor every single cow that goes onto that rotary parlor on a daily basis, twice a day. Now, those two women know those cattle intimately. They know them by sight, but they're also assisted by an ear tag, which gives them the digital information per cow. And then they apply whatever veterinary requirements are needed by that animal, and they make note whether the animal needs mastitis treatment or whatever, and they were vaccinating. And this friend of mine said, done and dusted one morning. And the beauty about that is that those farm laborers are there again in the evening, they're there on the next day, and they're there the next evening. Whereas a departmental official, if they go onto a farm that is contaminated with foot and mouth disease to vaccinate animals, they can't go to another property for 7 days. Whereas if you give the vaccine to a farmer on his or her farm or in their village, they can vaccinate those animals. They don't have to go to another farm, and life continues. But they have put in a prophylactic preventative of the disease spreading across their herds.
It's quite astonishing. As you know, Athol, I've also farmed for a period in my life as well, to see the disconnect between the bureaucracy who demand that the farmers may not vaccinate their own herds, and the reality of it just would be impossible. You'd never get anything done if you were always relying on a vet, apart from going bankrupt with the vet bills. So where does this disconnect come from? Or is there something darker behind it?
Look, I don't think it's darker than ineptitude and bureaucratic bungling and statist ideology. I really don't believe that it's anything worse than that. But Judge van der Westhuizen, who found against the department in the litigation between the Department of Agriculture, the Minister, Sakaliga, and Agri Free State, he said that there's nothing in law that prevents a farmer from doing exactly what you've just said. Now, you saw what happened to the Midlands of KZN, where you happen to have farmed. That area, the dairy industry was devastated. They were hit hardest. And we've seen since then that it's rolled across the country like a veld fire. It literally has gone across the country like a veld fire. And interestingly, I was listening to Frans Cronje the other day, and it's amazing how journalists have familiarized themselves with this outbreak. And it's concerning that the minister and the department haven't done as much homework. And Frans Cronje was explaining that if you have Bos Indicus type cattle, which are cattle that come from the Asian countries, they are more immune, and so are the indigenous cattle of Africa, appear to be more immune or resilient to this strain of foot and mouth disease than European breeds. Now, most of the dairy animals come from European breeds, Bos taurus, and they are more susceptible, but also their living conditions, living in confined spaces on top of each other, being fed out of communal feed troughs, being in the same rotary parlor every single day, twice a day with other cattle. That is the kind of environment where this disease spreads rapidly. But one thing that has been proven is that if you get your animals vaccinated, you can slow the disease down. Now, the Minister of Agriculture, and I commend him, he made an observation that in this country, we've been chasing foot and mouth for the last number of decades. And his objective is to get ahead of it. And he has now come up with this national disaster plan where we will vaccinate up to 80% of all the cattle in South Africa. Now, that's a noble objective, but the objective needs to be implicated and you need to meet the target. And it's not 1 year to vaccinate 80% of the cattle. You need to vaccinate 80% of the cattle in this country as soon as possible, preferably within a window period of like 3 to 4 months maximum, and then come back with the follow-up. Now, the department has set themselves this goal of 80% before the end of the year, and there will be reinfections before then. And there are already reinfections, Alec. And I mean, even in the Western Cape, that was one of the last infected provinces, we're starting to see an uptick of cases, and they're already reporting that these cases, I'll tell you exactly how many there are, 22 cases now in the Western Cape. And that has been since the declaration of this disaster. So we're not getting ahead of this. We are still chasing foot and mouth disease outbreak. And the minister should do some introspection and reflection. And I saw yesterday an interesting, or the day before, a DA MPL in Gauteng posted that the province was not on top of its game. Now, what is happening, Alec, and I suppose it's a national government malaise all over the world. If they are responsible for a national disaster management of foot and mouth disease, but things aren't happening in their provinces, then they will blame MECs and they will blame provinces. Now, the national disaster management of foot and mouth disease lies squarely with the National Department of Agriculture under the control of the minister. So if the MECs are not doing their jobs, then the minister must intervene. And one of the members on our portfolio committee from the Democratic Alliance posted a WhatsApp on our WhatsApp group to say that he's concerned that in Limpopo they are vaccinating animals without ear tags, without recording the vaccinations, without proper surveillance. And in other provinces, they're sitting on stockpiles of vaccinations, as they are in Gauteng, when other provinces are still waiting for vaccines. Now, when you get that kind of lamenting in a portfolio committee of people from the same party as the minister, then I would think that it was time for the minister to start doing some introspection. So I don't want it to be about Athol Trollip criticizing a former colleague. That's way beyond me, Alex, or beneath me. I've been out of the DA for many years before I got back into politics, and I never slagged off the DA. It would be completely disingenuous for me to slag off my former party that I led in many positions for nearly 40 years. I'm not that kind of politician. I'm a conviction politician. I'm not a career politician. If I was, I would have stayed in the DA and endured the things that bothered me and just stayed there for a salary. I'm not here for a salary. When I left the DA, I went into agricultural advisory business of my own. I survived. I did well. And I can do it again. I'm not reliant on a job in Parliament. But while I'm in Parliament and while I have a job here and a responsibility, I'm going to do it regardless of who the minister is and whether he was a former colleague or not. We are not getting on top of this foot and mouth disease outbreak. And you can read, and I really appreciate the fact that you've had some of the top dairy people around. There's a guy called Andrew Morfu who writes a lot about what's happening on the ground, and we're not getting ahead of it. But one thing I can tell you is that every farmer that does get vaccine, there is a huge amount of relief from the anxiety of waiting and waiting and waiting, because it's a waiting game to contract foot and mouth disease. It's not a waiting game to just wait for the vaccines. While you're waiting, you could contract foot and mouth disease on your property despite every effort to ensure biosecurity. We've spoken about it before. It can come across a fence with a crow or a vulture or a nocturnal animal that is a carrion feeder. That's how it happens. And in Natal, where you farmed, it comes carried by mist, Alex. So you cannot combat it other than vaccinating your herds.
In uncertain times, good information is priceless. The BizNews Conference is heading back to the Drakensberg. Join me, Alec Hogg, from the 11th to the 14th of August for BNC 9, Champagne Sports Resort, where it all began, and where our community gathers for honest conversations, smart investing insights, and direct access to some of South Africa's sharpest minds. Come and rub shoulders with the best we've got. 28 keynote speakers, 3 days, Seats are available now. Book your seat by clicking the link in the description. Athol, I'm still a little confused. So the Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, is now saying we're going to vaccinate the herd in South Africa. Okay, but we are part of the African continent, and there are crows to the north of us. There are cattle to the north of us or elsewhere on the continent. But more than that, we also have endemic foot and mouth disease in many of the wild animals. And for many years, certainly what Theo de Jager was explaining to me, there was a buffer zone between the Kruger Park or game parks and where farmers were. Now, if you happen to vaccinate the herd once, does it mean you have to keep vaccinating the herd every year to ensure, because of our unique circumstances, that this disease does not come through? Or is the buffer idea ever being reconsidered? Clearly, it didn't work in this case, but it did work for decades before.
Yeah, Alec, that's a very good point. First of all, our SADC neighbors are also now contaminated with foot and mouth disease. So not only are we looking after livestock in South Africa, it's Southern Africa, and look, it's spread across the world. They are in Asian countries that they're having the same SAT1 strain outbreaks. So, Alec, there are a number of things. First of all, the buffer zone was not maintained. So we were able to maintain control over foot and mouth disease despite having areas where it is endemic. We were able to do that because there were a buffer zone or a red zone, and that was backed up by Honest to Put Biological Products and the Agricultural Research Council, that was really on top of its game, providing vaccines for the whole of Southern Africa, but certainly for all the South African farmers. Now, here's one of my greatest concerns. This iconic institution, international institution, Honest to Put Biological Products, has been allowed to become the laughing stock of this country and no longer an international iconic institution. And the minister, when he became the minister in 2024, committed to the country and the farmers of this country that he would investigate the 500 million rand that was misappropriated, that was intended to build a good manufacturing practice facility to provide vaccinations to South Africa and the world under acceptable control environment. Now, 500 million rand went missing. Now, that report is still missing. Recently, the minister's spokesperson says that they're no longer doing a forensic audit as the department. They've handed it over to the SIU, and she's waiting for a response. Now, you know how lethargic the SIU has been over the last number of years, especially under the leadership of Shamila Batoy. But waiting for the SIU to conduct an investigation while you are preparing to spend over R1 billion again to establish a good manufacturing practice facility at Onderstepoort under the authority of the Agricultural Research Council would be a major concern for me if I was the minister. I would not want to be embarking on a new venture on the foundation of a very flawed management organization at Onderstepoort. And that's what's happening right now as we speak. So that's a big deficiency. Then, Alec, what we require now, because we have this outbreak that's spread right across the country, is we will be vaccinating our livestock for the next 10 to 12 years. And this is where I get lost. I get lost here because the minister has declared, or got the president to declare, this state of disaster based on the fact that we can get ahead of this outbreak if we do what they've done in South America, in Argentina and Brazil. But what we have done is we've abrogated the successful model of those countries and said the state will control everything. We will import the vaccine, we will distribute the vaccine, we will inoculate or vaccinate the animals ourselves, we will do the surveillance, and we will do the follow-up. And that is where this government has proved to be incapable of fulfilling their strategy. In South America, the strategy was slightly different. The state did procure the vaccines, and they made sure that they had facilities in their countries that could produce on scale. And then they made the vaccines available on cooperative shelves, on veterinary outlets, that farmers could access the vaccines, that they could apply or vaccinate their animals, and that they would do daily surveillance and they would report back to the state. And they did it region by region. So instead of just saying we're going to have a shotgun approach and do it across the whole country, what they did is we'll start in KZN where the epicenter was. We will then move to Mpumalanga adjacent to KZN, then move to Gauteng and make sure that there's saturation vaccination, and then slowly move across the country to where the outbreak was not so significant, Northern Cape, Western Cape, and there were isolated cases in the Eastern Cape. So I think we missed a trick there. We should have applied the successful model, and that's where the term good practice comes from. If you identify good practice somewhere in the world that has dealt with a challenge like this, then if you apply the same model, you don't have to, learn new lessons through the school of hard knocks. Now, I want to just read to you from this report, and I want to tell you what the school of hard knocks is actually about, not from the mouth of Athol Trollip, but from the mouth of the Director General to the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee. And it says, economic impact of disease outbreaks, domestic and international markets. The current foot and mouth disease outbreak in the Western Cape is having significant economic impact on the provincial livestock industry and broader agricultural value chain. Movement restrictions, quarantines, reduced slaughter throughput, and disruptions to livestock markets are increasing operational costs for farmers while reducing income and productivity. Dairy, beef and feedlot, transport, auction, and processing sectors are particularly affected, with smallholder and emerging farmers remaining highly vulnerable due to the limited financial resilience and prolonged restrictions on animal movement and trade. Now, this disease is having a profound impact in one of the sectors of our economy that has performed rather well. And you know why they perform well, Alec? We're now the biggest exporter of citrus in the whole world because we have brilliant citrus farmers who have identified that with our climate, we can produce varietals right across the year that compete with Spain. And Spain has tried everything in the book to block us exporting our products into Europe. But we've overcome that because we're a resilient bunch of farmers in this country. So here's the trick that I think the minister has missed. And in the last sentence of what I've just read to you, it says particularly small livestock owners. Now, communal farmers and people who live in communal areas whose livestock are all mixed together, they get crawled at night, they're also highly susceptible to the spread of this disease. If the state had said, we will use every state resource to make sure that every single animal that is held by small livestock owners and small-scale farmers and people living in communal areas, and the rest we're going to leave up to the commercial farming sector to take care of their own animals, which we have proven through generations in this country, in fact, over centuries in this country. We have proven that we can produce the best agricultural products in the world in the greatest constraining environment. We're a rain-scarce country, yet we export so much. So, Alec, this is where I believe the department dropped the ball. They should have focused their resources on helping the helpless that don't have the resources to take care of their animals properly, confine them. There's limited fencing, and that's where the area should have been focused, because if there's no fencing, animals move around as they please. That's how the disease is spread. Whereas on commercial operations, commercial farmers maintain fences, they maintain biosecurity, and they have got the resources to vaccinate their livestock. And if the department had said that's the way the private partnership's going to work, private-public partnership's going to work, we would have been ahead of this curve already, and we would have been starting to look at revaccination. But I think what Judge van der Westhuizen did in his court ruling was that he reinforced the fact that the government does not have the authority to constrain South Africans beyond constitutional provisions. And he said there is no provision that prohibits a farmer from vaccinating his livestock.
Healthcare matters, but what matters most?
Having cover for the people who keep this business going.
Bonitas is there for you when it counts. Bonitas, medical aid for South Africa. Visit bonitas.co.za and find your plan.
You've given us wonderful insights from the farming perspective. Thank you, Athol. But from the political perspective, you have a Minister of Agriculture who was deposed by his own party. He's no longer the leader of his own party. He got a scathing court judgment against him. He's caused unbelievable antagonism amongst the farming community, which is an important community when it comes to voting as well. Can Steenhuisen survive this? And indeed, the fact that we now see the Gauteng DA kicking back, it would suggest that his own party might want to depose him here. Or what's your reading of it? You know politics far better than most of us.
Yeah, look, Alec, I'll tell you one thing, because I've been not a victim of it, but I've experienced it. I'm certainly not a victim. There's nothing more ex than an ex-leader in politics. Some of them cling on, some of them want to come back. But once you're an ex-leader, you're an ex-leader. And the fact that Minister Steenhuisen is now coming under friendly fire from his own organization, as I said, the Gauteng legislature and WhatsApp groups from members of his party in the portfolio committee. And there's more and more recalcitrance from the minister. This is what I can't understand. I mean, the minister's digging in his heels. And I think I sent you a clip where he was interviewed about this particular litigation before it went to court. And he just laughed. He literally laughed in the face of the reporter that said, what will happen in the court case? And he said, well, they'll just have to wait another month. Now, a month is a long time for people waiting for vaccination. And now the fact that only 38% of these cattle have been vaccinated is a concern. And it's compounded, Alec, by the fact that we're now having outbreaks in piggeries. Now, once you have outbreaks in cattle and you don't get that under control, and it starts affecting piggeries, it's going to then affect goats and sheep and all cloven-hoofed animals. And we will start seeing infections in game across the country in areas that have never been endemic areas, like the Kruger National Park. Now, this is why this is such a travesty, I believe. It's a travesty because we have a minister who has dug his heels in because he has listened to incompetent people in his department. Alec, I sit in these meetings with these officials who speak as if they have read something out of a textbook but have no direct knowledge, and they keep informing the minister that they're on the right track. You cannot be on the right track if your target is to vaccinate 80% of the animals in this country, cattle only, by the end of the year, and you've only vaccinated 3.8 million, and you now have a stockpile of vaccines, but you're refusing it to give it to the people who can administer this overnight. We could get ahead of this curve in the next 6 weeks, Alex, if they just gave the vaccines to every cooperative in this country and allowed farmers to go there, take their allocation, account for it. They all have SNAP scans on those bottles. You account for every bottle you have. You vaccinate your animals. You surveil them yourself because it's in your very best interest, not like an official who works for the department. Whether an animal dies or not is neither here for those officials. They'll still be here next week. They'll still be here after the next Minister of Agriculture comes into office because they're full-time employees of the department. But what you can't have is you'll never win this fight if the minister is now blaming the former minister and the minister before that about what happened at Onderstepoort. When he became the minister, he said he would investigate why 500 million rand went missing and why we allowed Onderstepoort to fall into complete disrepair and we cannot produce vaccines. And then the minister promised that this self-same Onderstepoort would be producing 20,000 vaccines a week. We are not seeing those vaccines being rolled off the vaccine production facility, limited as it is in Onderstepoort, and we're not seeing a profound difference of management and accountability at Onderstepoort and the Agricultural Research Council. So if you don't fix the cause and you're forever addressing the symptom, you're never going to come to the end of this war against foot and mouth disease. And Alec, it is a war. Speak to any farmer whose livestock has been affected or infected, because you know, initially, when there was strict control of disease management areas, which the department's now done away with, when there was strict control of disease management areas, you actually confined those farmers to zero income for up to half a year. Now, how does any organization survive on zero income? How do you pay staff? How do you feed your livestock? How do you water them? How do you send children to school? How do you pay your land bank loan? You can't do that. So I'm afraid the anger and the antagonism that has been built up in the farming community is of the minister's own doing. And, time will tell whether it will have a profound political consequence. But I believe it is going to have a political consequence for the minister, certainly, and his department, which indirectly means the national government. But it's the government of national unity, and there are partners in that government. And the DA is one of those partners, and the minister is a DA minister. And Alec, let me give you a very raw perspective of politics. As the GNU starts fraying, and it is fraying, and fingers get pointed at various ministers, the ANC are going to point fingers at Minister Steenhuisen with alacrity, and they're going to blame him. And they're going to say, this minister dropped the ball. If we had one of ours, we would have been on top of it. Only when he became the minister did this disease get out of control. So there is going to be a massive political consequence for John Steenhuisen as the minister, but I believe also for his party, because I think his party could have put a lot more pressure on him to say, listen to the people out there. The farmers are mad at you. Can't you just get the vaccines into their outlets where they procure all their other veterinary supplies? Get the vaccines there in the fridges. Let the farmers arrive with their cool boxes. Pay for it. Administer it. At one stage he was talking about biological warfare. What a load of nonsense. This is a dead vaccine. It's not a live vaccine. You can't commit biological warfare with a dead vaccine. What does commit biological warfare are crows, vultures, nocturnal animals that feed on carrion, and animals moving around that are infected. That's actually biological warfare. The only way you can contain that is by vaccinating those animals, that they don't contaminate and recontaminate themselves.
What a fascinating subject, and a very tragic one as well. Athol Trollip, thanks for giving us your unique perspective, given that you are a man of the land. And as you say, I wasn't aware that you had so many generations, but it's in your blood, and you can see the passion coming through there. I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com.